Shut up.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in X-Men 97, Episode 9. There were so many references to the comics, to past X-Men episodes, and we are definitely going to talk about that ending where Magneto finally chose the nuclear option on Wolverine. We have a lot to cover. As always, thanks for shopping our merch store where we have lots of X-Men inspired parody merch like this Remember It shirt, Lee and Kirby's Diner, and this brand new, and I love this so much, the Brave are the First to Die shirt. You can check those out with the links below. Now, way back in our Episode 1 coverage, we broke down the new Marvel animation intro, but one thing that I just noticed was that the intro ends with T'Challa, probably because Chadwick Boseman's last time playing Black Panther was on the show What If. And also now Storm is back in the intro wearing her original costume from Giant Size X-Men #1. Shout out to Heavy Spoilers and Caleb Bandy on Twitter for catching that the people running in the middle now are now Prime Sentinels. I cannot believe I missed that because actually when I was a kid I taped this show on VHS and then I remember pausing this scene to see if there were any cameos. It was my very first Easter egg hunt. We begin the episode with everyone reeling from last week's events. The Prime Sentinels invaded the X-Mansion, Magneto took out all of the world's electricity, and Xavier crash landed into the ruins of the mansion.
To me, my X-Men.
Now, of course, this is not the first time we've seen the X-Mansion trashed. It happened in the movie X-Men Apocalypse, it happens all the time in the comics, and Juggernaut even destroyed the place off-screen in the original series.
I'm getting a visual on the school.
It can't be.
Fun fact, actually, the Juggernaut episode aired out of order. So when I was a kid, all of a sudden a random episode began with them repairing the mansion.
Let me put some nails in that for you, Gene. I always did like working with my hands.
And then we didn't find out why it was destroyed until a few weeks later. The professor wakes up in his bed next to his original wheelchair because his fancy hover chair from the 90s comics has been destroyed. So this is a sign that we are now going to go back to basics, reverting to traditional enemies like Magneto and the Sentinels, and also reverting to the 70s costumes like the ones I'm going to explain a little bit later. Frankly, I think Magneto is the most interesting character on this show. He is the most dynamic, and he has an incredibly relatable character arc. However, our friend Tommy Bechtold theorized last week that Bastion wanted Magneto to get loose so he could turn humans against mutants, and I'm curious if that theory is going to pay off next week. So Magneto is looking at the ships that he has shut down, taking in a rare moment of quiet, with no sounds of ships or radio waves, just stillness. He is looking at his own helmet. Now remember, back in episode 2 this season, he was doing the same thing, staring down at the symbol of his villainy and asking himself if he had gone down the right path. This also mirrored a great comic from the 80s, X-Men vs. Avengers, when Magneto goes into the ruins of Asteroid M to retrieve his old helmet. But this is when he was still trying to be a hero, so he wanted to use the helmet circuitry to remove all prejudice of mutants from the minds of humanity. It's a really good read, it's a good comic, you should check it out. And here he is looking at the helmet once again, probably contemplating what it even means to be a villain. I think Magneto really enjoyed being a hero for a while. He enjoyed saving lives. He enjoyed being exonerated by the UN, a body that he once addressed as a mutant terrorist in the episode Sanctuary Part 1. And now, Magnus knows that as soon as he puts on that helmet again, the world will never see him that way again. This makes him a tragic figure because he wants the world to...
Oh, there, just a second, person. Oh no, the IRS needs my social security number because my account has been compromised.
Doug, hang up.
But the IRS, they say I can win Taylor Swift tickets.
Dude, the IRS does not call you or give away Taylor Swift tickets. It's a scam.
Oh, well how did they get my number then?
Dude, that's the messed up part that nobody wants you to know. They got your number and email from online data brokers. The internet is filled with shady people who pay big money just for access to your private data. And I know this because I used to get a ton of spam phone calls and emails.
Oh, but you don't get those calls anymore?
Very rarely, because I signed up for Incogni. They're the sponsor of this video. Incogni is by far one of the best products we talk about on this channel. This is the app that they don't want you to know about. You would be shocked how much of your personal information is just out there on the internet, like your address and phone number. And shady companies can get this info so easy that it's scary. Like, you may have noticed, you sign up for a loyalty card or a newsletter and suddenly you get bombarded with targeted ads or robocalls. That's because these companies are selling your data to giant firms called data brokers, and then they sell your information to other advertisers. Incogni found more than 100 data brokers that were selling my sensitive information. And I'm talking about financial details, health history, internet search history,
your bank records, medical histories, voting patterns, emails, phone calls, your damn SAT scores.
And they were selling this information to the highest bidder. Several of them were rated 10 out of 10 for data sensitivity, and they were selling information about my potential health risks, my insurance provider, even my credit type. Very scary stuff. But here's the thing, guys. These data brokers have to remove your name from their database if you ask them to.
Oh, I don't got time to contact over 100 companies. I gotta manage the store.
But that is where Incogni comes in. They contact those companies for you. You don't have to do anything, and they alert you when the request has been completed. After signing up, I get almost no spam, and I can't even remember the last time I got a phone call from my old friend, unknown number. So I highly recommend giving Incogni a try. Use my code ScreenCrush with the link below to get an exclusive deal, 60% off an Incogni plan. It's a great deal that you don't want to miss. Now, back to what I was saying. So then we go to the other villain, Bastion, carrying his mother's deactivated body. Now, in the comics, Bastion was an amnesiac. Very long origin story. I'll just say that he was an amnesiac for now, and he was found by a woman named Rose Gilberti who cared for him like a mother. Now, in the comics, he cares for her, but he also uses her, just like Bastion does in this show.
Actually, I don't think that Bastion uses her. I think he turned her into a Prime Sentinel to upgrade her so that she would live forever and mutants couldn't harm her.
That's actually a great observation from Colton Ogburn, the guy who's eternally trapped in our TV but doesn't know it, so please don't tell him. Bo DeMaio tweeted that Bastion's mom was actually in the episode One Man's Worth as this waitress. Sorry we missed that Easter egg. Now down in Rio, an angry mob corners Jubilee and Roberto after the Prime Sentinels arresting them were shut down. Heavy spoilers pointed out that this is mirroring the opening sequence of the show, where first Jubilee and then Roberto were trapped in an alley by an angry mob, and then Storm and Forge swoop in to save them just as Magneto resurrects Asteroid M. Now remember, Asteroid M was the sanctuary that he created for mutants in the two-part Sanctuary arc in Season 4. He was betrayed by one of his own acolytes, Fabian Cortez, and then he crashed the asteroid into the sea so it couldn't be used for evil ends. And, as I love to mention, afterwards he got really depressed.
Losing Asteroid M has made me weary of this life, Dr. McCoy.
And watch you tolerate it.
Now, when Bastion puts his mother to bed, it is beneath his final dream painting that she showed Scott and Jean last episode.
Painted it when he was 16. The final dream, he called it.
As I pointed out last week, this is evoking Hitler's final solution, the eradication of entire races of people. Now the painting is over her bed as a way to say you can rest easy at night because the mutants will be gone. And as we'll talk about later, all of this, everything that's happening, is actually the fault of Bastion's mom. Now one thing I appreciate about how this episode is how careful they are to fill in the plot holes, like Forge explaining how his robot leg still works.
Rigged together an electrostatic deflector ages ago.
And also notice how the leg also has a jet booster in it, like Iron Man's.
Magic legs.
Scott is arguing with the professor, telling him that this is all his fault.
What did you expect was going to happen when you tossed him to school?
Now this is very similar to the adversarial tone that Scott starts to take with his mentor in the comics in arcs like the Messiah Complex. I actually expected the professor to say that he left Magneto in charge because he saw the good in him, or that this was the only way to break their cycle of violence. But instead he says,
I wanted you two to be free.
Now look, Madeline did suggest this as one of the professor's reasons in episode 2.
Maybe he did this for us.
But that's really silly. Putting your greatest enemy in charge of your school so Scott and Jean could take time off?
Not a great plan.
Now Nightcrawler is praying over his sister's bed when she finally wakes up from the coma that she's been in for 2 episodes after fighting the Trask Sentinel. I still think that she might be infected with the nanosentinels that create Prime Sentinels, and that might be what leads her to join Magneto, but you know what? We'll save that for another video. Now when she learns that Trask survived, her first words are heartbreaking.
Remy?
We learned that Magneto didn't just disable the Earth's magnetic field, he is permanently deleting it. This would mean, I guess, that no electronics on Earth would ever work again, and that mutants would have to find a haven on Asteroid M while the humans inhabit a dead world. Once the human race destroys itself, mutants would inherit the Earth. Scott decides to split the team into blue and gold teams, just like how they were divided in the 90s comics. The blue team operated in the book X-Men, and the gold team operated in Uncanny X-Men. And just like in the comics, Scott leads the blue team while Storm and Jean lead the gold team. And of course, the teams are named after their original school colors. And guys, once again, I want to thank you for clicking this video, watching us, supporting our channel, and shopping our merch store where we design all the merch ourselves. I freaking love the new shirt that we've designed, the Brave Die First, where you can actually see the claws start to melt and drip like goo, kind of like what we see in this episode. We have a ton of other X-Men parody shirts and Deadpool parody shirts up on the store right now. Thank you guys so much for watching. The links are below. Now, notice that Roberto is wearing the classic New Mutants uniform from the comics, black and gold. But the black is also maybe foreshadowing that soon he's going to be joining Magneto's side. And then we learn about the original sin of the show, Bastion's true origin. Charles tried to recruit Bastion into his school, but
His mother slammed the door when she heard the word.
His mother's existing bigotry toward mutant kind meant that Bastion was destined to become a living sentinel and nothing more. Now the lesson here is that large-scale bigotry, genocide, riots, and war often start just around the family dinner table. It is heartbreaking, like they point out, to think that Bastion could have been one of the original charter members of the school. It makes that painting that we've seen since episode 1 have kind of a haunting feeling, like there's a person missing, and that missing person is responsible for all the hardships of the season and Gambit's death. Meanwhile, the new Science Bros rebuild the pneumatic scrambler that we saw in Season 3, Episode 16, Part 3 of the Dark Phoenix saga.
One mnemonic scrambler, made to order.
But remember, in that episode, the scrambler could only hold back the Phoenix Force for a short time.
Quickly, while I still have control. Stop her now!
And here they're also working on a way to maybe rob Bastion of his powers permanently, which then Storm lets them know right away is out of the question. It's weird that Forge doesn't mention, though, that he actually knows Bastion, as we saw in this photograph from episode 4. Or, you know, maybe his prior knowledge of the man is what is allowing him to calibrate this device correctly.
Yeah, I don't really know, because I'm just a little dog.
And then we go to Rogue wearing her original suit from when she was a supervillain, as we saw in the episode A Rogue's Tale. The professor suggests that Gambit should have been buried at the school and not with his people down in the bayou, because in the professor's eyes, he sees Gambit's past as just criminal, but his efforts at the school were noble. But then Rogue takes offense to this because she loved all aspects of Remy. She didn't just see him as an X-Man, she saw him as her man.
Maybe if you saw us as people and not students.
And then Magneto shows up wearing his helmet, embracing his role as the adversary. So this is all taken from the classic comic Uncanny X-Men 304, when Magneto officially returned from the dead after being gone for 2 years. It is a pretty great issue where we learn his real name for the first time. Magneto interrupts the funeral for Colossus' sister Illyana, who had died from the legacy virus. Then he offers the same choice to the X-Men, to join him, and Colossus actually leaves the team like Rogue does here. In fact, his words,
Asked me to walk your path. Are you prepared to walk mine?
are taken straight from the comics. And look guys, he walked Xavier's path for like 4 episodes and he was barely in one of those episodes. So like, Eric, don't go patting yourself on the back just yet. And it's not even like the governments of the world attacked Genosha, it was just this one evil robot guy.
Yes, but he was working with a secret charter from the United Nations.
Oh, shut up, Colton.
Magneto was right.
Now notice that as Magneto hovers, we see these auras appearing in the sky. So this is a really cool detail. Auroras, like the Aurora Borealis or the Northern Lights, are caused by charged particles on the Earth's magnetic field colliding with gases in the atmosphere. And now, because the only magnetic waves on Earth are above Magneto right now, we would definitely see particles collided in the atmosphere above their heads. He mentions a conversation they had in a bar.
It was just as you said that day in the bar.
And remember, this is the same conversation he referenced on Genosha when Charles first told him about his dream.
We were at a bar in Germany when he first mentioned his dream. I laughed at him. Was he sentimental or suicidal?
And notice when Eric tells Charles about Genosha,
Promise realized.
They cut away to Rogue to show how the memory of that perfect night is still haunting her. In his monologue, Magneto confirms what we all feared, that Leech is indeed dead.
I promised a boy a future free of fear, only to watch his frightened eyes be vaporized inside his tiny skull.
Jeez, man, that's pretty graphic.
Yeah, but that's a memory that will never leave Magneto's mind, nor Rogue's. It makes complete sense that she would join Magneto at this moment, unlike in Uncanny X-Men 304 when Colossus' choice honestly always seemed kind of arbitrary to me. Heavy Spoilers also pointed out that Rogue is wearing Gambit's jacket, so when she leaves it with the Professor, she's acknowledging that she's letting go of the past that she shared with Remy as an X-Man, and she's moving into a new future. And then she says,
Hell, Morph was barely on the team 30 minutes before we tossed them to the wolves.
Now, this is referencing how, like in the second episode of the original show, Morph was seemingly killed by Sentinels, and when this happened, the total runtime of the entire series was only about 29 minutes. She also mentions Jean's frequent deaths and resurrections as the Phoenix.
Who dies next, Professor? Jean? Been there, done that.
So now what we're seeing is that Rogue's trauma on Genosha has radicalized her.
I will not see any more mutants die.
Now, I also thought that Roberto going with him made complete sense. Roberto never really signed on as an X-Man, and he's been given no reason to believe in the Professor's dream. And then his mother essentially severed his link with humanity. So then they make a temporary headquarters on Muir Island, just like they did in the comics after the mansion was destroyed. Now, the island is currently uninhabited after Moira McTaggart and Sean Cassidy died on Genosha, but I like that we still get the over-the-top bagpipes like we did in the original show.
You created the Center for...
First, we see the Blackbird and the smaller shuttle in the hangar besides several other vehicles. In the hangar, we see Wolverine's mutant cycle from the 1991 toy line. Such a cool detail. And I think this looks like the same model car that Bastian drove last episode. Now, that's possible because, remember, Bastian knew Dr. Adler, according to this photo that Forge had, and Dr. Adler did have a lab on Muir Island in Season 1. One thing though, this little flying saucer, if it looks familiar, it's because this is a massive Easter egg. This is your mom. But seriously, it looks so familiar, and I try to reverse Google image search, no answer. So if you know what this is, tell me in the comments. We also see the former X-Men costumes on display. There is Storm's original costume from Giant Size X-Men #1 and Scott and Jean's Generation 2 suits after they graduated from their original X-Men uniforms. Scott wore this suit while he was leading the new X-Men back in the early days of the Chris Claremont run, and Jean, of course, referenced the Marvel Girl costume way back in episode 2.
Haven't worn this old thing since that battle in the blue area of the moon.
Now, in the comics and in the show, she wore this costume when the X-Men fought the Shi'ar on the moon, and when she sacrificed her life to save the team. And we also see the classic orange and brown Wolverine suit that John Byrne designed. Now, we almost saw this suit in a deleted scene from The Wolverine, and I'm really holding out hope that it becomes the Wolverine suit by the end of Deadpool and Wolverine. And we also see the Professor's combat jumpsuit that he wore in the original series when he was on missions, which was also taken from the early 90s X-Men comics, which, by the way, looks way better than the combat suit that he wore during the Claremont run. Scott takes a moment to look at the Jean mannequin in a moment that is loaded with symbolism. First, the visual is similar to Madeline's nightmare in the comics, when she visualizes Jean taking away her face and identity until she becomes like a mannequin. We also saw this visual called back to in episode 3. But also, Scott is not sure when Jean was swapped out for Madeline. He doesn't know if the woman he loved is dead or not. Jean has also been killed and resurrected so much that he's not sure if the woman he loves is even still this Jean or if she was the Phoenix. Also, a blank face for Jean is symbolic of how Scott projects identities onto her. In the comics, there was a heartbreaking period where he wanted her to be the Phoenix for him. And in this show, we see him having a telepathic affair with Madeline, like he's not really sure who he really loves. Now, during this, he's having a heart-to-heart with his son, Cable. Now, Cable, for the original series and in the show, has been dressed like his original Rob Liefeld design from the comics. But then, Scott tosses him the next uniform that he wears in the books, one that is designed to look like his old man's. He even wore this suit in the original Operation Zero Tolerance comic book. Now, on one level, this is a way to show that Cable is now embracing his past. But here, right here, oh, this is so good. This is an amazing moment that vindicates 24 years of geek frustration.
Am I going to war or a circus?
What'd you expect? Black leather?
This is, of course, Cyclops mocking this line from Cyclops in the original X-Men movie.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
No, sorry, I meant this line.
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Now, Bryan Singer famously wanted to distance the original X-Men movie from the comics, and he actually forbid any comics from appearing on set. He included this line as a way to kind of mock the comics and to show that his movie was gritty and realistic to appeal to a wider audience. And I love that we have slowly evolved into an era where Spider-Man's eyes actually emote, where Wolverine is finally allowed to wear a yellow suit in the movies, and then we can see that it looks badass. The Professor is speaking telepathically to President Robert Kelly, who mentions
the Magneto Protocols.
Now, these Magneto protocols were first mentioned in X-Men issue 1 when Magneto finally returned to being a villain in the comics. The Professor reminds us of the ticking clock that the Earth's magnetic field will permanently destabilize in 1 hour. And Kelly says,
my hand will be forced.
Remember, Robert Kelly started off the original series as a senator with very extreme views on mutants.
I intend to relocate every mutant in this nation to internment camps.
But after the X-Men saved his life, he ran for president on a pro-mutant platform and even pardoned Beast for breaking into the mutant registration facility. Now, I'm going to throw out a theory here. I think that Kelly is going to send in the Avengers after the X-Men. It's actually a little weird that he doesn't send them in right now, because Captain America implied that he has a team operating in this universe.
Once I get the thumbs up, I'll lead my team to Mexico to apprehend Gyrick.
I mean, for something this scale, wouldn't it be all hands on deck? Like, send one team after Bastion and send the X-Men after Magneto? Now notice how Morph is wearing a slightly different uniform with these large shoulder pads, more similar to the look that he wore in the alternate universe Age of Apocalypse, which is how he was introduced into the canon comic books. And Jean is back to the Marvel Girl suit that we just talked about, but also she has let her hair down like Madeline does. This is showing how she is fully embracing both her memories and Madeline's as her new true self. And then we get to the final act of the episode. Gold Team leads a mission to Bastion's base, where he has chained himself up in a kind of crucifix pose, a way of showing that he is the new god of the Sentinels, the new god of humanity, and the god of this new world he is building.
I am a god. Okay.
Like Beast says, he is the central control hub for all the Sentinels, so he can see and hear events all over the world, like an omniscient being. He activates these Gen 1 Sentinels who were shielded from Magneto's pulse by this goo, at least I'm assuming. Forge immediately tricks two of the Sentinels into hitting each other.
Yeah, why are you hitting yourself? Hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself.
And then Storm gets a lovely parting moment with Jean.
I thought of you while away. Of when my sister faced her darkness and emerged.
And of course, she's referencing how Jean is able to control the darkness of the Phoenix and sacrificed herself for the universe. Remember, Storm also had a moment of resurrection, like the Phoenix, when she regained her powers.
Make them mind your weather, sister.
And them weather your mind.
Oh god, it's so cool. So Jean creates a telekinetic bubble to get the team to the surface, where Beast says,
Bastion's building his own ideal future.
And notice how this does look exactly like the neighborhood where Bastion grew up that we saw last episode. And then Morph turns into the Hulk. Jean then uses her telekinesis to spin him around like the Tasmanian Devil, leading to this classic Easter egg line. Morph really is the most powerful X-Man.
Yeah, why doesn't he just turn into Magneto and solve everybody's problems at the same time?
Morph Smash!
Yeah, you're right. Morph Smash! Morph Smash!
Notice how here, just for a couple frames, we can see Cable on a Sentinel's chest blasting it in the face. Then Morph throws the head into DeMaio's diner, named after series showrunner Bo DeMaio. Also, X Nelson and Chris Griffiths on Twitter both pointed out here you see a Claremont Avenue on Roberto's business card. A shout out to longtime X-Men writer Chris Claremont. Meanwhile, Sinister attacks Jean. Now remember, Sinister believes that Jean and Scott's DNA is genetically perfect. He kidnapped her, cloned her, and is essentially obsessed with her.
It's creepy.
He believes that because he knows her DNA, he knows her.
I know your genes.
And I love this moment where he offers to tell her when he swapped her out with Madeline, and she replies,
It doesn't matter. Madeline fights with me today.
Remember, after Madeline's death, Jean absorbed her memory, so essentially they have become the same woman. In the original show, we never got to see Sinister fight like this. I love how he's using his powers to shield himself under cars, then appear behind Jean. It's really showing the scope of this show's animation capabilities. And then we go to the blue team on Asteroid M, and notice how Magneto crafted a throne for himself out of Sentinels. Now, this is badass and a really cool detail, but it's also showing how his new world is simply a reaction to the old world. He is not crafting something new and pure. He is making his kingdom out of revenge, a sentiment that Charles echoes here.
It is the world that rules you that has made the bitter man before me.
Meanwhile, Roberto and Jubilee attack each other, and I was a little disappointed though that Jubilee is still throwing her sparkles around.
But out of your fingers, was that like sparkles?
In episode 4, she caught a glimpse of what her powers are capable of, and it would have been really cool to see her try to replicate some of those moves. I guess we'll just have to wait though. Meanwhile, Morph tries to pose as Sinister to get close to Bastion, as Beast also fails to get the mnemonic dampener onto his head. Now, I loved how effortlessly here Bastion creates a hand from machinery. It's a cool way to show how all machines are now an extension of his will. In the skies above, the Blackbird is shot down, distracting Storm and causing her to get blasted out of the sky. Guys, we are in the all is lost moment of the battle as we approach the final massive gut punch. Now, Sinister, who essentially created baby Nathan, has the ability to control him just like he controlled Madeline. Notice the red diamond on the center of his forehead, just like the one that appeared on his mom's forehead when she was being controlled. Now, Madeline was able to break the mind control when Jean appealed to her better nature and her love for her son.
This is the greatest moment of my life.
But that's not going to work here because Cable resents Jean.
If I had it my way, I'd be on Isla Mirada with you and Jean instead of space. But she's...
not my mother.
He says,
My real mother was a world-class telekinetic.
And then he unleashes his full powers. So, in the comics, Cable is actually one of the most powerful telekinetics on Earth, but he rarely uses that ability because he's constantly using his powers to keep the techno-organic virus in check. In the Operation Zero Tolerance comics, there is a moment where he has to use his full powers, and the virus starts to take over his body once again. And here, they make it seem as if he has killed Jean, but I'm also wondering if him using his powers here is actually going to disable him in the next episode as he starts to succumb to the techno-organic virus. Back on Asteroid M, we're getting an adaptation of the comic book X-Men 25, which takes place right after Uncanny X-Men 304. In that issue, the Professor leads a team to Asteroid M, where Magneto uses his powers to pull the adamantium from Wolverine's body. This forces the Professor to wipe Magneto's mind. Now, for a second, I thought they were going to do the same thing here.
You've left me no choice, Magnus.
Because those are the same words the Professor uses in the comics. But instead, the Professor takes over Magneto's powers, but he can't fix the magnetic fields just yet because the Gold Team's mission is not completed. This gives Magneto the opening he needs to put his helmet onto Charles, symbolically saying, "No, Charles, you are the villain." And it's possible that the helmet is also dampening Charles's powers, like how it prevented him from reading Magneto's mind. He's tightening the helmet around Charles's skull, killing him until Wolverine steps in. He says,
"Been in a lot of wars, bub."
Which is true. Wolverine is well over 100 years old, and as we saw in X-Men Origins Best Sequence, he has fought in several American wars like the Taylor family. And then he throws down this heartbreaking line,
"The brave always die first."
Which has to have reminded Magneto of Leech, the bravest person he ever met.
He promised Leech would never be scared again.
Hab keine Angst.
Now, Wolverine is actually using Magneto's own words against him.
"The brave are always the first to die."
That line is taken from the finale of Season 1, when the X-Men left to fight Master Mold and Magneto stayed behind. But, as a friend of the channel, Bevan, pointed out to me, he is also telling Magneto that he kind of understands where he's coming from. So these words, and the memory of Leech and his near-death experience, push Magneto over the edge. He betrays his fellow mutant, his former teammate, and he chooses the nuclear option. He pulls the adamantium from Wolverine's body in this recreation of this panel from X-Men 25. By the way, a panel I've never really been that big of a fan of. I love Andy Kubert's art, but I always thought the adamantium should have been stiff like knives and not all gooey. But still, it is a seminal moment from the comics. Afterwards, Wolverine spends years with no adamantium, bone claws, and a super advanced healing factor. Now, I bet we're going to see that storyline play out over the next season if they don't walk all this back next episode.
Yeah, why would they send a guy with metal claws to fight a guy who controls metal?
Yeah, it's kind of a hide the zombies in the crypts of Westeros type decision. But the thing is, I don't think the X-Men ever imagined Magneto would go this far against one of his own race. In the original series, they're Magneto's opponents, but it's always with a kind of gentleman's agreement.
All mutants are welcome on Asteroid M. Even X-Men.
But now, the gloves are off. Magneto has declared war on humanity and also declared war on any mutant who opposes him, setting us up for the finale where the X-Men are going to be caught in the middle between evil mutants and evil robots. I should also acknowledge that in the comic, this battle led to the creation of the villain Onslaught. When the Professor took Magneto's mind into his own, their personalities merged and created a villain called Onslaught who essentially destroyed half the Marvel Universe. If they're going to bring in the Avengers, this would be a great way to do it because Onslaught kind of kills them in the comics. Kind of. I mean, it's a long story.
Good question. For another time.
So, what did you guys think about the episode? What do you think about the show so far? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.